This is the second part of our discussion about organizational development. And if in the first part we focus on what we call organizational change, so most of what we talk about are at the organizational level. In this part of the lecture, we're going to focus on the employee level and how to involve them in an organizational change. And specifically, what we're going to discuss is what we call empowerment. Okay, so empowerment is a word that has been tossed a lot in various fields such as sociology, psychology, and we hear this a lot. But this time, we're going to talk about industrial or organizational empowerment. So how does it feel to be empowered in the workplace? And that's what we're going to discuss. Okay, so when we say that we are empowering someone, it means that we do allow that person or leader to decide for himself or for his group. Okay, so most of the time there are leaders or executives who want to dictate everything that they want to happen. But on the other hand of the equation, there are also people or executives who allow their subordinates to decide on their own. And when you allow people to get more freedom with what they're doing, then you are empowering them. Okay, that's why I told you earlier about um, decentralized and centralized organization. And the trend right nowadays is having a more decentralized approach. It means that all all the commands doesn't have to come from the top management, but rather the different branches of an organization can decide on their own. They have the power to implement changes, to implement projects, etc. So now the question is, when do we empower and when do we try to avoid empowerment? Because of course, if you empower someone, you're letting him decide on his own. And what if the person is not ready for such responsibility? Okay, so employees need to be involved in decisions in circumstances in which the quality of the decision is important. The decision affects the employees, and the supervisor does not have the knowledge to make the decision, or the employees don't trust the supervisor. So here are some example scenarios of why are we going to pursue empowerment. Okay, so perhaps the decision is very important for it to be handled by a single person alone. Okay, so that's why there are leaders who ask for suggestions of their members. They call a meeting before they decide to go fully online in their classes. Perhaps the executives of school call the meeting of the board of trustees, or they call the principals or the deans. Okay, that's very important. That's why a single person is not it's not supposed to be handled by a single person alone. Sometimes we ask, as teachers, we ask for the input of our students. Okay, because like what the second part of this example is saying is that we ask for input because it affects other people. If I decide that the entire university will go fully online, I'm not the only one who's going to be affected by this. Okay, I should ask for the input of my subordinates because they're the ones who's going to implement the online learning. Or sometimes we can empower because we do not have the knowledge to make the decision. Say for example, school executives or school principals may not be able to decide on their own about online learning because, say for example, IT or information technology is not their field. So they need to ask from experts, and they will empower people from the IT department. Okay, or there are instances wherein we empower because employees don't trust the supervisor. Hence, to build that trust, we're asking for the input of our subordinates. So in making a decision to empower, we need to consider the following. First is the importance of a decision. Because sometimes when a decision is, if we're deciding on something very important, we do need to ask for input from other people. But there are also instances wherein it's the leader who should decide. Okay, so let me give you an example. During an emergency, who is a more effective leader? A democratic or an authoritarian leader? Research would say that during an emergency situation, it's better to have an authoritarian leader because during an emergency, you no longer have time to ask for input from everyone. You should be a leader who is firm with your decision. Okay, so those are the things to consider. Other than that, the knowledge in the problem area. So if I'm going to decide about online learning, I should ask myself, do I have enough experience to talk about online learning or to decide about it? Or do I need to empower people and hear their input about the problem area? Okay? And the structure of the problem. I hope you do remember Feidler's contingency model, and he said that in our theories of leadership discussion, it's beneficial for a leader if the problem has a structure or if the problem has a clear goal or a clear step-by-step process. Because sometimes if there's no solution to the problem yet, maybe you need to ask for input from your subordinates so that the problem can be more structured. Okay, other than that, do you think that the decision will be accepted easily by your members? So decision acceptance is, it's easier for this for a decision to be accepted if the members have an input in the decision that was made by the company and the probability of decision acceptance. So to what extent do you think this decision will be embraced by the community? Other than that, subordinate trust and motivation also help, and the probability of subordinate conflict. Okay, so if you make a decision, consider your subordinates. How will they be open to the idea? Because if they're not so open with the idea, then perhaps you can empower them to ask for their suggestions. Okay, so those are the things that we need to consider. So in IO language, when we say that we are empowering people, okay, we seldom intend to let employees to make all the decisions. So if I say that I empower you, it doesn't mean that I'm putting all responsibilities on your hands, okay? Because when I was still in the school organization, I made sure that I empower my subordinates by letting them lead a certain project. It doesn't mean that I'm the president that I should always be the leader. So sometimes I tell them na, okay, you lead this project so that you will have the opportunity to show your capabilities. Okay? It doesn't mean that I'm putting all the responsibilities into their hands. Okay? Instead, when we say empowering, we're saying that we give them more say or more input in day-to-day activities. Of course, it's hard to work for an organization wherein no one listens to your input and it's the boss who always decides on what's going to be done. Okay? It's more satisfying if you know that your inputs are being heard by your company and by your executives. Okay, so this time let's talk about one of the theories on about empowerment, and what we're going to discuss is the levels of employee input and control, which means that the more input and control that you have about the job with the job, it means that you're more empowered. Okay, so at the bottom of this model is what we call following. So if you are at the following level, it means that you have no real control over your job. It means that they are given instructions about what to do, when to do it, and how it should be done. Okay, so perhaps if it's your first month in the company, you will feel that your level of empowerment is at the following stage. You should not make any changes because you're a newbie, you're a rookie to what you're doing. That's why you should only do what they tell you to do. Then eventually, if the company gains more trust in your output, they will give you ownership of the product. So when you are in the ownership of the product, you're still being told about what you're going to do. Like, for example, in my class, at first I tell them what they need to write in statistics, what do they need to press in the software, but eventually I do allow them to have ownership of the product. It means that I would tell them that I want you to create a statistical write-up, but it's up to you what you're going to execute. Okay, so how this differ with following is that in ownership of the product, I tell you what to do, but you will check the quality of your output. Okay, that's why there are some teachers who allow their students to check each other's work. Okay, or they allow the students to check their own work to practice ownership of the product. Why? Why is it important to own your product? It's because owning your own product is reducing the redundant task of checking and rechecking your output. So that if you own the product, your supervisor doesn't need anymore to check the product because he is confident that you have already monitored and screened your output. So you need to have the right competency to check the quality of your output, in ownership of the product. Eventually, if you have more experience and you gain more trust from your company, you will be in the advisory level. And if you are in the advisory level, you're asked to provide feedback, suggestion, and input into a variety of organizational concerns. So what is the plan of our school? Then they can ask you because you're an expert in that field and they can ask for your advice. However, if you're in the advisory position, they do ask for your opinion, but there's no guarantee that they will follow your advice. But at least you know that there's a chance that they will listen to what you're saying. Why is it that they don't necessarily listen to your advice? Because what if you're giving your opinion on a very important matter? If the matter is very important, then the decision making is crucial, then it's not enough that one person will decide on that problem, but rather it needs to be shared, participative, or with the use of team approach. So if you use team approach in decision making, there's more people involved in making decision, which means that there's a higher chance for the executive to listen to the input of your team. Okay? Then eventually, if you have reached the what we call absolute status, then it means that input and control gives an employee the absolute authority to make decisions on his own. No need for group consensus, no supervisory approval. However, he is also responsible for the consequences of that decision. So that's the highest level, absolute. When you're in the absolute level, your supervisor will no longer check your outputs because he believes that you can check your own output and you can decide which types of outputs are you going to submit to the higher ups. So these are the levels of empowerment that we talked about earlier. So as you can see, it's from following to absolute. And if you're in the following level, it means that there's a low level of trust, at the same time low level of responsibility. But if you're in the absolute level, that's the highest level of trust your company can give you, but at the same time you have more responsibilities. Okay? Okay, so in this slide we have an example of, so this is like a tale of two bank employees. Their names are Jane and Emily. So I would give you a background about this. So Emily is a more experienced worker in comparison to Jane. Okay, so how do they differ in comparison to each other when it comes to their responsibility? So look at this. When it comes to their tasks such as opening accounts, approving loans, and waiving check fees, Jane cannot do must only follow orders, while Emily is at either advisory level or absolute level. It's because she has more experience when it comes to dealing with these tasks. That's why the company believes in her capabilities. Now, let's talk about their schedule. Of course, even though you're a newbie, okay, you can decide on the time that you're going to take your break, take your vacation, and schedule your hours of work. So they have a higher level on these. Okay, they are in the participative and advisory level. But when it comes to hiring new staff, although that's not their job, okay, they do ask for Emily's opinion. Okay, however, they do not ask for the opinion of Jane because she's also a newbie. Okay, so there's no reason to ask for her opinion about hiring a new employee. And other than that, they do ask Emily when it comes to changing the procedures or methods and developing new products. So that's the essence of being empowered. Sometimes your company will ask for your input not just about what you're doing, but also about other things that may affect the work environment. So now let's take a look at the consequences of being empowered. So what happens if you're empowered? So of course, research in IO would say that there is higher job satisfaction because you feel good that your company listens to what you're saying, and there's a decreased stress due to greater control because being controlled all the time by your supervisor is highly stressful. However, even though your stress related to control has been reduced, your stress related to responsibility has increased. What about financial outcomes? So people who are more empowered will receive more bonuses and more pay increases. Why? Because they do have more responsibility. When it comes to their career, if you're empowered, you feel more secured. You feel that there's a lesser chance that your company will get rid of you. There's a higher chance for promotion and marketability. You will have more marketable skills. However, the downside of being empowered is that there's an increased chance of being terminated. So you might be asking right now, I just said earlier that if you're empowered, you have a high job security, then why is it that you have an increased chance of being terminated? That's because if you're empowered, you do have more responsibility and you make more decisions. However, what if you make decisions about crucial matters and you made the wrong call? You made the wrong decision. So that may result to termination. So that's the downside of being able to decide. Making a wrong decision puts your career at risk. Okay, so basically that's what you need to know about empowerment. And this time we're going to talk about one of the trends in organizational change that's happening in the recent years is what we call adapting flexible work arrangements. Okay, so when we adapt flexible work arrangement, so that's a popular org dev intervention to provide employees with flexibility when the hours they work. Okay, and such flexibility might involve the number of hours, the times in which the hours are worked, and or where the work itself is performed. And we're going to talk about those things one by one. Okay, so basically this is a quality of life improvement for a lot of workers out there. The first strategy in arranging a flexible work setting is to decide whether you're going to go with full-time work or with flexible hours. So we do have what we call flex time, wherein that's a work schedule in which employees have some flexibility in the hours they work. And what are the parts of a flex time? I want you to be familiar with these concepts, especially when you work in the HR. These will be very useful in your practice. So we do have what we call bandwidth. So that's the total number of potential hours available for work each day. So here in our country, in the Philippines, our bandwidth is 8 hours, or in some jobs that would be 12 hours. But for the sake of being standard, I will adopt 8 hours. Okay. The next is what we call core hours. When we do say core hours, it means that those are the hours at work wherein everyone must be at the office, or if not in the office, another definition is these are the hours wherein everyone must work. So if you're working in the food industry, you're working in a restaurant, then the core hours must be the lunch time or the dinner time. Okay, it depends in which time do you have more customers. While flexible hours are the hours that remain in the bandwidth that in which employees has a choice of working or not. Okay, so flexible hours will include the hours that are not included in the core hours. And let me show to you a chart that will illustrate what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so here's an example of a case of we can see that she has a 12-hour bandwidth. So their company is open from 6 to 6. Okay, and let's look at the different hours in their flexible work arrangement. So they require this bank employee to be present at 11 to 1 and at 5 to 6 because these are the hours that the bank was very busy. But then the flexible hours are the from 6 to 10 a.m. and 2 to 4 p.m. So you can go to work around 8, around 9, but it's required for you to be there at the core hours. Okay? So that's an example of the difference between core hours and flex hours in a 12-hour bandwidth. Okay? Okay, other than that, we do have what we call other work arrangements, such as gliding time. If you adopt a gliding time in your company, it means that this is a flex time schedule in which you can choose your own hours without any notice to your company. While some companies adapt what we call a flexi tour, wherein you're free to choose your work hours, but you must notify the company a week in advance. While in modified flexi tour, you should also notify your company, but you should notify them a day in advance. Okay, I don't know if these are being which of these is being the most implemented in the Philippines, but what I know is that some companies they do adapt flexible work hours, but still they're the ones who will decide on the time that a certain employee needs to be there in the office. So even though you don't work you don't go to work at 7 a.m. anymore, they will tell you that today I need you at 11, tomorrow I need you at 9. Okay, it depends on the number of customers that they have. Okay, another way to improve the quality of life of your employees is to adapt what we call a compressed work week. Okay, so you do remember that the traditional work setup is to work for 5 days and for 8 hours a day, or in some cases 6 days and then 8 hours a day, 8 hours a day. Okay, so basically you're working for 40 to almost 50 hours a day. Okay, so what we can do is, why don't we try to compress the work week? Instead of making you go to the work 5 to 6 times a week, then you can go to the work for, let's say, 4 days, but you have to work for 10 hours each day. Okay, so maybe you would say that it's just the same. Okay, so let's take a look at what does the research have to say about this. What are the advantages and disadvantages? So the advantages include, of course, you have more day offs, you have more time with your family, and that's a big quality of life improvement, and opportunity to moonlight. And when we say moonlighting in IO, it means that having another job at the time that you're not working at in your main job. Okay, so make it's like working at night. Okay, reduce commuting costs. So if you only have to go to work 4 times a week instead of 6, then that will help you save a lot of money. Reduce absenteeism. Of course, you only have to work 4 days, then you have 3 days to relax, then there will be a reduction in absenteeism. And they say that adapting compressed work week increases productivity. You don't need to go to work 6 times a week for you to be productive. Going to work only 4 times a week is enough to make you productive. And of course, all of that combined will result to an increase in job satisfaction. However, the disadvantage is that you're still working, and you're working beyond 8 hours. Right now, you're working for 10 hours. So there might be an increase in fatigue. So just weigh the pros and cons before deciding to adopt a compressed work week in your company. Other companies, what they do is they adapt a peak time pay arrangement. And when you use a peak time pay arrangement, what you do is that certain employees are encouraged to work only part-time but are paid at a higher hourly rate for those than employees who work full-time. So you can have an arrangement with someone. Say, for example, person A goes to college and he or she needs an extra for him to finish the college course. So what if person A works in a fast food chain, but he doesn't have the time to work there for a whole day? Then you can have a peak time pay arrangement. So go to work only between 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Okay, and then I'm going to pay you a higher hourly rate because you're serving at the time that there's a lot of customers. Okay, other than that, we also have what we call casual work, wherein this is a scheduling practice in which employees work on an irregular basis. So you don't need to go to work all the time, but you are on call. Okay, the downside of casual work is that, what if you're not called to work? Then how are you supposed to make money? What if you have not been on call for a month? Okay, so that happens in real life. So how are you supposed to save money if you're not being paid on the days that you're not working? And lastly, we have what we call job sharing. So when we say job sharing, there are two employees who share one job. The difference of job sharing with part-time work is that with part-time work, there are two employees doing two different things, but with job sharing, two employees are doing or performing one job. So one will work in the morning and the other will work in the afternoon. So this may be a good arrangement for pregnant women, or for people who are still in school, or those who cannot work whole day. So job sharing is a good option for them to pursue. And we also have what we call telecommuting, or in layman's term, work from home. So an employee uses a computer to electronically interact with the central office. Other terms commonly used for telecommuting are telework and mobile working. And right now with our situation, we do know that telecommuting is a good option, and it's doable because we have been doing this for quite some time. Okay, so that is it for telecommuting. Another factor that we're going to discuss with organizational development is downsizing. Okay, so when an organization restructure, the result is often a decrease in the size of their workforce. So we do know that there were a lot of companies who downsized because of the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can see on the news that 300 personnel were laid off in one company, that one company had to let go of 400 employees. Okay, such reduction in force are the result of variety of factors, including economic difficulties, loss of large contracts, pressure by stockholders for quick profits, mergers, or that's a situation wherein two companies merge into one. Of course, there needs to be downsizing if there are so many employees, new technology replacing humans. This happens, say for example, in ticketing businesses. What if the workforce is now being replaced by computers and employee empowerment programs resulting to less need for managers? So if you do empower your employees or your workers, you might realize that one executive position is no longer necessary for the organization to function, then he or she needs to be laid off. Okay, so to reduce the impact of downsizing, here are some possible options that you can pursue. The first one is called temporary employees or temps, or in the Filipino setting, we call these contractual employees. So now I do understand why there are some companies who cannot give opportunities to their workers for a long time because they're also avoiding the possible impact of downsizing. Okay, so they can hire through agency. Say, for example, there are a lot of agency hired people like secretaries, like security personnel, etc. Okay, so that in case that there's a need to downsize, those people who are agency hired will not suffer that much from downsizing because their agency can deploy them somewhere else. And you can also do outsourcing. Okay, you can pay another company to do or to perform a certain service for you, so you no longer have to think about that certain aspect. Okay, you can just pay people to do something for you. That is outsourcing. Or we also have what we call offshoring. So the difference between outsourcing and offshoring is that in offshoring, it's like outsourcing, but the company that you pay to perform a certain function is in another country. So that is offshoring. Another strategy that can be taken at this stage is to encourage employees to change careers and to help these employees learn the skills needed to make a career change. So there are companies who care enough to their employees so that what they do is they help these employees embrace change or downsizing by preparing them. Say, for example, giving them downsizing, what's this? Downsizing, giving them counseling, giving them career guidance. Okay, and they can also offer early retirement, or they can ask employees to take pay cuts or defer salary increases. So of course, it's hard to, ask an employee to take a lower pay. We can expect that these employees would end up resigning. But that's one option that you can pursue. And like what I told you earlier, you can also adjust work schedules. Okay, so when we lay off or downsize in a company, here are the four stages that our employees go through, okay, when there is layoff. Okay, so the first thing that happens is denial. Of course, they're going to deny that a layoff will occur. They might rely or they might cling to other statements that they've heard that layoff will not be possible and there are alternative ways that the company can pursue other than layoff. Then after that, if they realize that layoff is inevitable, they might be angry. So employees realize that they might lose their jobs and they become angry at the organization, their supervisors, even their coworkers, especially those who will not be losing their jobs. So there's some sort of envy towards those who will remain in the company. And then after being angry, they experience fear. Okay, fear in a way that they may not have a job after that, or they may not be able to pay their bills or feed their families, or not be able to find a new work. Okay, so after fear, eventually you will experience acceptance. or but the victims accept that the layoff will occur and are now ready to take steps to secure their future. Okay, so basically the steps in understanding layoff, or the feelings, the stages that you go through during layoff, is basically similar to the stages of organizational change that employees go through. Only that, unlike organizational change, this is more, this is something that is not so comfortable to talk about. This is not something that occur um, a lot of times. So it requires more effort from the company or the organization to help their employees to go through this. That's why you can prepare interventions such as psychological first aid, or counseling for those who are afraid of being laid off. Okay, and you may help them find a new job, and that's how you can contribute to what they have given to your company. Okay, so when we downsize, okay, there are people who are terminated. They're called the victims, and these are the employees who lose their jobs due to a layoff. So emotionally, victims report higher levels of stress and a tendency to engage in drug use or alcohol use, and marital problems, depression, unhappiness, anger, frustration, and dissatisfaction with life. So right now, I hope that you're considering that when you work in a company, you should give psychological first aid or counseling to those who will be needing them. Okay, because these are the outcomes of going through downsizing. But if you're lucky enough to remain in the company, it doesn't mean that you are no longer feeling any problem or fear because of the downsizing, because these employees who are not laid off, they're called survivors. They are also exposed to risk. So say for example, after the layoff, they are more afraid when it comes to taking risks because they might think that they may get terminated. They are more apprehensive and narrow-minded, more stressed, anxious, secretive, skeptical, cynical, and distrustful. So you can see that they're also victims here, but they're luckier than those who are called victims, or they're luckier compared to those who were terminated. Okay? And they also experience role conflict and ambiguity, meaning they don't know, um, their jobs are so overwhelming that they don't know if what they're doing is still part of their original job, or are they already doing something that is somebody else's job. Of course, you have to perform more functions knowing that you have lost a lot of workers in your company, and you might lose confidence in yourself. You have lower levels of morale and job satisfaction, and feel a loss of control. So when you give counseling or other types of interventions to people who have been through downsizing, do not just focus on those who will be terminated, but also give counseling to those who remained in the company. Okay, because they also need help. Okay, so in this chapter, you learn that employees react to change by going through stages of denial, defense, discarding, adaptation, and internalization. Employees best accept change if the reason behind the change makes sense and the person making the change is trusted and respected. That's why leaders are very important when it comes to organizational development. Change is best implemented by creating an atmosphere for change, communicating the details, making the change over a reasonable period of time, and training employees. Employees can best accept change if they speed up, take initiative, and spend energy on solutions rather than complaining. Other than that, the five levels of employee input when it comes to empowerment are the following. Number one is following, ownership of the product, advisory, shared, and absolute. If you're in the following level, it means that you only follow orders, but if you're in an absolute, it means that you have responsibility over your job and you make your own choices. After that, we talk about downsizing or layoff. So layoffs can be avoided by using temporary employees, outsourcing, offering retirement programs, and creating alternative work schedules. And there's a proper way to conduct a layoff. When there's layoff or downsizing, there's there are unavoidable negative effects on the victims, survivors, the organization, and the community. And finally, we talk about work schedules. Compressed work schedules and flex time increase job satisfactions and decrease absenteeism. So basically, those are the things that I want you to learn in an overview about organizational development. And I hope that you will understand these concepts more when you work, and you will understand that before you make a decision at work, you should consider the feelings and circumstances of the people around you. Okay, because you need to be able to help your employees, specifically if there will be downsizing, if they have difficulties in the jobs, and the role of the leader is very important, but at the same time, the role of the peers will help their in helping their co-employees is important as well. So that is it for organizational development. I hope you learned a lot, and thank you.